Welcome to Brainstoryum. I'm Tizard, award-winning dreampunk and deeply weird fantasy author. And yes, that's me and my fiction that's deeply weird. Explore and imagine with me the most unexpected story ideas using the surrealist word game of Exquisite Corpse. Find out more and join in at annatizard.com. This is a storytelling challenge unlike anything you've tried before. Hello, imaginative people. I'm Anna Tizard, and this is episode 81 of Brainstoryum. Now, I think I mentioned in the last show that I am a little intimidated by fight scenes, writing fight scenes, that is, and this is a topic I want to explore. I don't want to write stories or books that are entirely based around fighting or a particular martial art, anything like that. And I think in any case, you'd have to be a bit of an expert to do that, certainly with personal experience of fighting. What I'm interested in is refreshing what I know, what I think I know, and improving my confidence, getting a bit more practice around writing fight scenes. So if and when the need arises, and a bit of a scuffle is appropriate to the story I'm writing, if it asks for it, then I'll be better prepared for that. I will admit that, perhaps foolishly, alongside this podcast and all the short stories that I write during it and develop from it, a novel is also knocking at the door of my brain. A novel in which, again, there will be weird creatures, and inevitably, I think, with the nature of the story, there will be some fight scenes, or at least confrontations. It is too early for me to talk about this longer work, and in fact, I know that I need to explore fight scenes separately before I start trying to hurl new ideas and techniques at this longer piece. I think it's often the case that you need to spend time, dedicate time to exploring a particular new or newish approach or technique in writing to get to know it before you necessarily apply it to a novel, because there's so much to think about with a novel structurally. And when I'm writing it, I want to be open to what it wants, the types of scenes and developments that flow within it intuitively. I don't want to start throwing things at it when they might not be quite right for the story. In my eagerness to learn and take things on board, I know I have a tendency to jump the gun, and from experience, I know I can end up going round in circles because I'll end up writing scenes that don't really need to be there, that don't serve the story. But this is the magic of short stories. Short stories are our playground and the pressure-free space, or much lower pressure space, in which to try things out, muck about, give something a go. If it doesn't work particularly well, who cares? It's only short. And if you want to learn and grow, you've got to try things and stretch yourself in new ways. And of course, I'm still building my next collection of short stories for my series, The Book of Exquisite Corpse, with the theme of weird creatures. Although I may step aside from weird creatures today, depending on what comes up, and if I'm going to try and write a little bit of a fight scene. Am I going to try and write a fight scene? I might have to try it. I think I've got to. We'll see. Now, I have started reading a book on the subject, Writing Fight Scenes by Marie Brennan, but I haven't got that far into it yet, and I thought the best way to open this topic on the podcast was to ask my fellow writers online for their thoughts and advice on this topic. Because there's such a wealth of experience and knowledge among us already, So why not? Cut to the chase and ask an experienced writer. So I put my question out there, which was, have you got any tips or hot takes on how to write fight scenes, especially if you've not done any fighting yourself? Sylvia Hartman, author of fairy tale adjacent fantasy, said, I would seriously suggest doing some fighting, even if it's with a friend and pool noodles, to get a sense of how one experiences such a thing, if there really is no personal memory to draw upon. Well, that is something I haven't tried, Sylvia, and for health reasons, I have a kidney condition. I would not want to risk getting hit anywhere near there. In fact, I'm not actually that keen on getting hit at all, anywhere. But what you say, Sylvia, about pool noodles, I hadn't heard that phrase before, but I understand that means going through the motions with a friend slowly, and this makes a lot of sense to me. It's like with anything physical, you end up with a muscle memory of doing something which you can call upon when you're writing a scene. And also you can see for yourself how each movement plays out and what parts of your body open up and become vulnerable to an opponent, and your imagination can fill in the rest. Carmen Backer, author of Folklore and Magical Tales of the Southwest, said, I visualise the moves and often stand to mimic the movements of the combatants to make sure they're possible. So, blending visualisation with just standing up and testing out the moves, a way of still being able to work it all out on your own, but physically. Stephen William Hanna, author of the Interloper trilogy and the Blind Age series, said, action to reaction to consequence/development. Oh, I feel there's already a lot to think about there. He says, watch any action scene with Jackie Chan. He's always at a disadvantage. He'll do something to try and gain the upper hand, but his opponents react and he has to adapt again. That cyclical flow is, I think, what makes good action, plus stakes, of course, he said. There's so much packed in here. I feel like I want to stare out the window for a while thinking about this one and trying to sort of get through it all. And it's so true. In fact, it echoes back to me something in the depths of my memory from when I used to be really into acting. Although this principle could surely be applied to story writing as a whole in a way, action leads to reaction, leads to consequence/development. I had some more technical writing tips from various writers as well. Patrick Towie, who writes heroic fantasy, said, I think this is one time to violate show don't tell. It's okay to write something like, Luke unleashed a flurry of lightsaber attacks, which Darth Vader calmly parried. No need to describe each one. But the corollary, the corollary to that is to be sure that you establish the skill level of who is involved first. So true. And actually this reminds me that the novel I'm dabbling in involves characters who are not experts at all in any form of fighting. They are as naive and probably as pathetic as I am, certainly at the beginning. So for this novel, it wouldn't necessarily help me if I took up karate or sword fighting or whatever and became some kind of black belt or equivalent. Establish the skill level of the characters first and work with that. Because if it makes sense, if you go beyond that, readers will notice and think, how did she do that? How did she get to be magically good at fighting all of a sudden, bearing in mind the character's life experience? Bob Gist, who is currently writing a middle grade science fiction stroke fantasy book, said, "The emotions are important, not just the choreography. So if your fighters aren't a couple of seasoned pros, then pain and fear and rage need to be highlighted." Excellent point, Bob. And this kind of feeds into the same general area. What your characters know or don't know about fighting will ultimately affect how well or badly they cope in combat. And emotions and reactions are so core to a story anyway. No one really wants a technical breakdown of each move, certainly not without the emotions that bind us to a character's journey, and something that changes in the overall storyline as a result of that fight. What was it Stephen William Hanna said? Action to reaction to consequence stroke development. More chin stroking. Will Chan, author of the fantasy series Alicia Dane, said, "Although it isn't a full-on action series, my books have a lot of varied fighting. I try to approach it more dynamically, shorter sentences, descriptive action words. I always play the scene in my head, trying to get the thoughts and emotions into play. Single first-person point of view." Great stuff. So imagining it, playing it out in your head, but keeping the thoughts and emotions in the forefront of your mind. Interesting, Will, that you mention first-person point of view, because I've been writing this novel in first person. It sort of wants to be in first person. It's just one of those things. Although, even though with the short stories, I generally prefer third person these days, so he or she. With first person, you're inside the protagonist's head, so you can only see and experience what they see and experience. You can't actually see beyond that or view the whole scene from a distance, which I was a little bit worried about. I was worried that it might not work quite so well as third person, but you have reassured me. In fact, looking back, I can't actually believe that I missed this in thinking this. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, which I talked about in the last show, is written from the first person, and it's got fight scenes and all sorts in it. So yes, this is good. We have options with point of view. Nick Vrakar, who writes urban and contemporary fantasy with a splash of horror, said, "I would suggest short sentences, small paragraphs to make the fight feel faster. Detailed descriptions of moves and actions will slow it down. If you're switching between characters, as in who's doing something, start a new paragraph, treating the action like dialogue." Fascinating. I hadn't thought of that. But yes, I see how that would help give the reader a sense of moving between different characters, changing into starting a new paragraph. If, of course, you're writing third person point of view, where you're able to see perhaps what's going on from the outside perspective. Dialogue is a great way to look at a fight. It's such a good comparison. It's a direct interaction between the characters, almost like they're saying things to each other, but through movement. Thank you for that, Nick. Hawkins Austin, a fantasy author who's written a lot of combat in his books, Castle Brave and Court Human, says, number 1, less is better. Too many people trying to describe Black Widow's takedown or some crazy shot probably won't work and will yank people out of the story. I had to look up Black Widow takedowns, and Google confirms it's a grappling move where a person jumps, wraps their legs around the other person's neck, spins and takes them down. I agree. I think readers will be distracted by too many overly dramatic moves that the protagonist is unlikely to be able to do. Number 2, nobody is Conan unless you're writing about Conan. Keep heroes simple and not much better than their opponents. Yes, good point, because if they're loads better than their opponents, there'll be no real tension if it's too easy to overcome the enemy. We're more likely to support the underdog in any case, quite apart from needing high stakes in a story to keep us on the edge of our seats. And finally, Colin Ward, a crime writer, said this about fight scenes. Tip 1, keep them extremely short. They are boring. Slow the pace of a story right down and rarely communicate well on the page. Keep sentences short, staccato, and get it over with quickly. Don't try and write the 20-minute fight scenes we see in films. Number 2, tension is found in the build-up to the fight and the consequences after. The actual fights are tedious. This is fascinating to me because I've often thought that fight scenes are boring in films, especially long ones. And on the page, I think you have to be even more careful to keep things short and varied. Colin tells me he's going to be writing a blog post soon around this topic because this is something very central to his crime writing fiction. So I will be keeping my eyes peeled for this and will announce more when I find out about its release. Wow, just wow, how much information and knowledge from just putting the question out there and a handful of fellow writers coming back. Thank you to everyone who responded for your thoughts and ideas. This is a fantastic start to the topic, which I will, of course, be returning to in the next show, or 2, or 3 even. I'll see how much I find out that is worthy of sharing with you. And of course, I think it's already clear how much crossover there is between treatment of fight scenes and how you write stories in general, the rest of your story. For example, where there's action and high tension, write shorter sentences. Right, without further ado, I think it's time to gather some new story ideas, hopefully one of which I can use to try my hand at a fight scene. Bring forth the socks of destiny. That's right, and for those who haven't played before or listened before, Exquisite Corpse creates a very weird sentence, combining different players' words and phrases into a sentence that goes describing word noun, action, describing word noun. So it will make grammatical sense, just about, but it might not make any other real sense until you've used your imagination. So I'm just reaching into the describing word sock. Oops, I've just managed to tip loads of them out, so I'm just going to pick one out and deal with that mess later. So this is from Mariah. Perplexed is our first word. Okay, so someone or something. I suppose it would have to be someone. Couldn't very well be a thing if it's perplexed. Next word is from Kimberly. This is a poet I met on social media, writing rather beautiful poems. Ooh, lightning. Perplexed lightning? Okay, this is, as usual, as I say, it's not necessarily making immediate sense. So I'm going to reach for an action and see if this takes us down a particular route of thinking. This is from Riley B. Deep fried, a huge plate of. So Perplexed Lightning is starting to sound like it might be a very weird title for a cafe or a restaurant. Perplexed Lightning, deep fried, a huge plate of. Okay, we're going to have to think outside the box, outside the socks for this particular one. So next word, I don't know why I'm reaching into the sock again. I've literally got adjectives all over, all over the tabletop. So this is from Paul Thomas. Villainous. Ooh, what kind of villainous thing or person is deep fried? This is a very strange one indeed. Last word is from, see, this is from Abra of Stories and Stanza podcast. Connoisseur. Ooh, that's interesting, because what happens when you deep fry a connoisseur? Yes, because a connoisseur is like an expert in matters of taste. And it's frequently, I mean, I don't think it's always, but it's frequently a connoisseur is associated with food. Posh chef-style food. So this is really weird, actually. When you look at the whole Exquisite Corpse, the perplexed lightning deep-fried a plate of the villainous connoisseur. This is all to do with food, but it's quite disturbing, because if an actual connoisseur is deep-fried, then this is a matter of cannibalism, a very gruesome tale, even if it's a villainous connoisseur. And if you think about it, that it's perplexed lightning. I mean, I don't know how lightning gets to be perplexed, but lightning is a force of energy that could, I imagine, well, not deep fry something, but it could zap something. Oh, God. Into quite a revolting meal, even if that meal did not consist of a food expert. So what is this Exquisite Corpse saying? I think it's saying, it's suggesting a very scary, spooky tale of a connoisseur, a sous chef or something, a specialist in food, who is also a villain of some kind. They've turned bad, and they get zapped by lightning and turned into a meal. Well, that's a pretty gross idea. Would you go horror with this? Or maybe mock horror? I don't think I could go all the way serious with this. I think it would have to be... I think you'd have to make it quite silly and comical to kind of skip past the absolute grotesqueness of this idea. It's interesting that the lightning is perplexed. That is a very weird word combination. And in a way, when I'm looking at the whole Exquisite Corpse, it seems to draw attention away from perhaps the characters. Because if you imagine you have one, well, I think they're both villains, aren't they? You've got one villain who's captured this connoisseur and is going to cook them using magic by directing lightning at him or her. But on the other hand, it's perplexed lightning draws your attention to the nature of the lightning itself, as if the lightning is a character. Interesting idea of magic itself having a personality or a consciousness. So as one villain tries to zap the other villain with his lightning-based magic, the lightning itself is questioning the person that is wielding it. This is a curious idea. I wonder if you could do something with it that perhaps helps you sidestep the horror thing if you're not a horror writer like me, because otherwise it would just be kind of disgusting. Anyway, I think it's time for another Exquisite Corpse. Okay, I have packed back into the sock all the adjectives that fell out spectacularly. So this is from Abra again of Stories and Stanza podcast. Solemn. Okay, who or what was solemn? Do we have a noun? This is from Mariah. Scrim. Okay, so I had to look this up. I did not know what this means. And so I jotted tiny notes all around the word scrim on this piece of paper. So it's a strong, coarse fabric, often used for upholstery. It can be used in the theatre as a screen or a sort of a backcloth or a heat-proof gauze to diffuse TV film lights. Do not ask me how I managed to write all of these things on a tiny piece of paper and still be able to read it afterwards. But anyway, we have a solemn scrim, so a piece of fabric that is solemn. A plain, coarse piece of fabric that is solemn. This is curious. Let's try for an action. This is from Sean, also known as Blue Wizard Facts. Found a new home for. This is not making much sense yet, so I will try for another word. Let's try for our next adjective. This is from me. Hazy. Okay, final word. Ooh, this is going to be a real head scratcher, I can tell. Final word for this exquisite corpse is from Paul Thomas. Podcaster. Is that me? Am I the hazy podcaster? So the entire exquisite corpse is the solemn scrim or coarse fabric found a new home for the hazy podcaster. All I can think when I read this, if this is me, if I am a hazy podcaster, then I found a new home through a solemn scrim. It sounds like I'm living in a tent. So maybe the solemn scrim provided, rather than found, a new home for the hazy podcaster. Hazy in what way? Kind of vague. Hazy podcaster could be someone who's suffering from brain fog. Well, I know how that feels. Or there's something else that's making them feel vague or uncertain about what it is they're doing, why they're doing it. Perhaps it's an existential thing. Why am I doing this podcast? And then a solemn scrim. The idea of a piece of fabric, or that could be a screen for TV equipment, as I was reading earlier. How could that be solemn? Part of me wants to flip it around and say, what if we said the hazy podcaster found a new home for the solemn scrim? Because, I don't know, the idea of a podcaster taking or maybe stealing or borrowing a backdrop for a theatre just because they like it, as a wall hanging or as inspiration for a story they're going to write and read out on a podcast. Then again, what if the scrim, if we are going with this idea of a backdrop, a backcloth in a theatre, what if it had scenery painted on it? And somehow this podcaster who's come to the theatre, maybe they're meeting a friend there, they have actor friends, maybe it's a podcast about actors interviewing actors on the stage, behind the scenes. And while this podcaster is there, she becomes absorbed into this scrim that's been painted on with this amazing, very detailed backcloth for scenery. What if she becomes physically absorbed into it, becomes a part of the painting? This is a very strange idea. Do you know what it reminds me of? in Roald Dahl's The Witches, which I loved as a child, there is one of the stories of a child that's zapped by a witch, is that they end up trapped inside a painting. And they even grow up within the painting. The parents never see her move or anything. She's always just there somewhere in the painting. She changes position. She even starts to grow. She grows up. But yeah, this is like a rather strange idea that I did not expect. And in what way is this a solemn scrim? Is it, say, a painting of Victorian street? Or could it be a painting of an apocalyptic landscape or a desert or something like that, something solemn, or even a graveyard? And this podcaster, just looking to interview a fellow creative, an actor. The actor's chatting to her, and then they go up to make them both a cup of tea or coffee, and the podcaster is left alone with this backdrop. And as she admires it, she becomes absorbed into it, and she is sucked into the painting. Interesting idea. But I think it's time for one last Exquisite Corpse, and then I'll make up my mind what I'm going to try drafting today. Okay, let's try this. First word is from Alessandro Bozzo. Metallic. Are we talking robots or some other kind of quality that makes someone metallic? Next word is from Mariah. Article. So that can be any object, really. That's quite an open thing. An article or a written article could be. Okay, our action is from, Paul Thomas. Had a feeling of ennui about. So that's, had a feeling of listlessness or dissatisfaction about something. This is a curious one. Next word is from, this is very crinkly. This has been stuck at the bottom of the sock for a long time. This is from Alessandro Bozzo. Grandiose. So something that is rather up itself, I'd say. Fancies itself a bit. This is from Mariah. Wine. A grandiose wine? The whole Exquisite Corpse is the metallic article had a feeling of ennui about the grandiose wine. Do you know what? My green tea must be brewed to death by now. I need to pour it. Get some inspiration. Oops. Okay. Okay, let's see. The metallic article had a feeling of ennui about the grandiose wine. I mean, taken literally, I think the only kind of article that could have a feeling about anything is a journal or a blog article. And by feeling, that would be the tone of the writing, the feeling that comes across in what the blogger is saying. So a blog about metallic objects, as in a metallic article, could be Spoon Collectors Anonymous, or more likely about swords, jewellery, even interesting keys. There's a sense of mystery around old keys. I can imagine collecting like weird antique keys. and they wouldn't take up so much space in your cupboard as all the swords. Equally, this metallic blog could be about the life of a modern blacksmith. But the general topic of the blog, has to be some kind of backdrop where wine could potentially feature, because the metallic article had a feeling of ennui about the grandiose wine. Maybe if they make goblets, among other things, and they do a bit of wine tasting on the side. But where's the tension in this story, and what is a grandiose wine? I think this may be the one that I try. And will there be a fight scene? Let me see what I can do. It wasn't quite what Gerard was expecting. Leandra, the CEO of Dream Wines, beamed at him between the curtains of her nut-brown hair, so close he could almost feel the heat of her flushed cheeks. Though her hand was half lost inside his muscular palm, she still clutched it in determination to be the welcoming host. "Just like Hephaestus," she murmured, likening him to the Greek god of blacksmiths. Now Gerard was blushing, though he had his black beard to help hide it. As Leandra finally let go of his hand, he turned to smile at her colleagues, sheepishly performing a mix of curtsies and bows, with a flurry of ruffled sleeves and long skirts. There was even a guy in tights. Gerard gave an appreciative nod. Even as a modern blacksmith, he was used to these medieval backdrops. In fact, medieval-themed fairs and festivals were still the best place to sell offline. He often joked with his more cynical friends that the lilt of recorder music in the background was as effective as the image of him hammering by the furnace with his smudged face and sooty apron, in prompting browsers to buy replica swords, candlesticks, and kitchen utensils they'd probably never use, just hang up on the wall. Deflecting Leandra's lingering eye contact, Gerard broke away gently to admire the room. A barn conversion, simple but impressive, with a long oaken table surrounded by high-backed rustic chairs. In the table's centre lay a roasted hog, complete with an apple stuffed in its mouth. The poor thing stared on morosely, hemmed in by a small, collapsed fence of roasted potatoes and green beans. "Solid barn," said Gerard. "I didn't realise you were going to put on such a show," he added, gesturing to the grandiose meal. "For a wine tasting," he annotated silently. "Only the best," said Leandra, "and you're very welcome." Gerard allowed himself to be ushered into the seat at the head of the table by the man in green tights, averting his eyes where necessary. The chandelier cast a cosy light, but it was so obviously 20th century he had to stifle a laugh. The plates and silver cutlery, positively gleaming, also jarred with the medieval theme. It was starting to feel a bit like amateur dramatics. As everyone settled into their seats, Leandra announced, "These are our chief winemakers, Sandra and Delilah, and our marketing guru, Patrick," with her last nod to the smiling man in the tights. Names and niceties floated through light conversation while Delilah did the honours, pouring a fresh bottle of wine into their goblets. The goblets. He'd hardly noticed them until now. They were, after all, the main reason he was here. But the wine was already poured, all goblets raised in his direction. "To success," they said, all rather practised. "To success." Gerard raised his goblet in return, a quirk playing at the corner of his lips. No harm in toasting to that. He paused to sniff the wine first, pulling the scents deep into his nose. Plummy, deep red, with a gentle spike that had to be this herb and spice blend they kept raving about on the website. But which herbs and spices? He frowned, unable to place them. The silence in the room thickened as they waited for him to drink it. He took a sip, trying to ignore the slight burning in the side of his cheek that told him they were all watching. He kept his eyes low as he swallowed, noticing the poor workmanship of the goblet. But of course, they'd picked out their plainest fare to encourage him to think, I could do better than this. But it was true. If they wanted a design that could become their new logo, or a part of it, they'd come to the right person. Oh my, the wine exploded on his tongue and rushed hot down his throat. Heavy and, yes, plummy, with an afterkick that made him raise his eyebrows as he glanced up. Eager faces grinned back, chuckling in shared understanding. Well, this is lovely, he said, his voice rather deep and gravelly. He cleared his throat. Not quite like mulled wine, though I wonder what it would be like served hot. Leandra leaned on her elbows. Yes, this is our dream wine number 1, no name yet, and it can be served hot or cold, although we wanted you to experience first the heat that comes from the spice blend. She opened a hand in explanation. As the inspiration for our logo, we want to combine a passion for traditional metalwork, a rugged beauty, the fire and the anvil, with the fiery flavour of this deep red wine. I wondered. She traced the whorls on the wooden table surface. Have you had a chance to reconsider our offer? Gerard swallowed, unsure if she was intending to repeat the discussion they'd already had. No percentage, he said. Flat fee only. Leandra tilted her head, her brown hair swinging by her jaw. Come now. He shook his head, looking away. All this presentation was very nice, but Gerard was a tradesman, and he was not about to be ripped off. He'd already told her in no uncertain terms over the phone that he would do the work for a fee, none of this royalty-only nonsense on a business that hadn't even made its first sale. As the flame of annoyance flickered in his gut, he muttered, You're living in a dream world. Ah, funny you should say that. Leandra's sharp hearing surprised him. She gazed at him across the long table from over her interlocked fingers. Because that's exactly what we do here. We make dreams become real. We open the mind and pull out what's inside. The best stuff, of course. Only the best. Her eyes glowed with passion as she spoke, her expression caught between a strange, fierce joy and a kind of daring. Won't you at least wait until the wine's taken effect before you make up your mind? Gerard sat bolt upright, meeting her gaze without blinking. What do you mean taken effect? What's in this stuff? This fine wine is, as you know, imbued with a special selection of herbs and spices. All edible herbs and spices. It's the secret blend that does it. Does what? Gerard glanced from Leandra and her watchful colleagues to the goblet in his hand and back again. They wouldn't dare lace it with something illegal. Besides, they'd all drunk from the same bottle. At the very least, if they couldn't agree on a goblet-stroke-logo deal, presumably they still wanted a good review on his wine-tasting blog. But above all, Gerard was not one to cower from a challenge. Holding her gaze as tightly as he now held the goblet, he tipped the wine into his mouth and drank. Tension dissipated like soap bubbles around him. The women let go giggles, soft as balloons. Who was that stunning woman in the low-cut medieval dress, the one who'd poured the wine? Delilah, wasn't it? And this guy in his funny green tights. He had an odd glint in his eye, but so friendly. They were all so friendly. This was such a lovely party. Gerard glanced around blearily at the soft lights dappling their upturned, smiling faces, and realised his jaw was buoyant in a grin he just couldn't hold back. Leandra glowed at him from the opposite end of the table. So you see, it brings out the best in the drinker. Your natural magnificence. She stood as she spoke, and it seemed as if she rose up and kept rising. Her hair, now deepening to magenta, flowed down her torso, sleek as two eels sliding over her curves until it might have reached the floor. Gerard froze in his seat, caught between wanting to check under the table to see how far it grew and the compulsion to stare at her exquisite, proud face. The high cheekbones, the goddess-like cloak that flowed from her now. Somehow he couldn't move. Leandra's blood-red smile was triumphant. Dream wines make you you, only more than that. The very best you'd wish to be. The herb and spice blend pulls desire from the depths of your dreams, your true powers that otherwise remain untapped, and others can see it too. The next moments unfolded like a dream. Delilah's hair turned golden, tumbling like water. Laughing, she found a crown on top of her head. The other female colleague, whose name Gerard had forgotten already, was dancing around the room, spinning until Gerard was dizzy watching, her dress now a ballroom gown in Alice in Wonderland blue. She sang as she danced, with a lute in her arms, her voice rippling like ribbons through the air in a tone that was almost painfully beautiful. "Dance with us, won't you?" A male hand rested briefly on Gerard's. Patrick, wasn't it? Gerard glanced down and stared until he realised what was wrong. His own hand seemed bigger than before, hairier, the protruding knuckles betraying a strength and size he didn't own. Patrick startled as if burned, pulling away, although he too had broadened into a young Jim buff, hardly recognisable, his arm muscles pushing against the cotton shirt like they were trying to burst out. Your best self? Your dream self? Patrick muttered, Hephaestus. Was he talking about the Greek god of blacksmiths? No, this was stupid, ridiculous. Gerard stretched his arms out either side of him experimentally, flexing his huge biceps, his pecs. He even had his apron back on, smudged and scorched as it always was, only bigger. All this from a wine? He held up the goblet and took another deep sniff from it, although there was only the tiniest splash of red liquid left. But it's not real. It can't be, he said. Delilah threw back her head and laughed. The woman in the ballroom dress spun on and on, her lilting voice caressing the atmosphere like perfume, like drunkenness. Leandra regarded Gerard from the opposite end of the table with a knowing and victorious glare. "This is power," she whispered. "This is the power to be." Disgust and fury spiked Gerard's stomach. "This is lunacy. What have you done to us?" A knife flashed close to him, pausing just short of his throat. Patrick, his face set in rage. "Do not offend Leandra," he warned. As Gerard watched in mute disbelief, the knife lengthened and sharpened, catching the light. Gerard lurched back. The chair clattered behind him. The dancing woman stilled and stopped singing. Even Patrick froze, a greedy, manic smile widening at the morphing weapon in his hand. Gerard snarled, grabbed the empty plate on the table and flung the edge of it into Patrick's throat. The man staggered back, spluttering and gasping. The room itself seemed to undulate like a ship's sail. Gerard gripped the edge of the table, panting hard. He had to clear his head. "It's all illusion, isn't it?" he asked. The roasted pig spat out the apple and said in the voice of a cartoon dwarf, "Only if you believe in it, mate." As if this broke the spell, Patrick lunged again with his knife, which had now sprouted into a glittering sword. Gerard ducked under the table, swearing. Realising it would take a mere 2 seconds for Patrick to reach him there, he grabbed the chair leg and swung it up. He let out a cry of fury which mingled with surprise at how easy it was to lob the solid wooden chair from such an awkward angle. Leaping out at Patrick, who had lowered his sword to rub his bruised arm, Gerard swiped the only weapon he could find, a fork, and in a beat he was gripping Patrick's sword hand while he held the cutlery to the man's throat. Patrick let out an anguished sigh, and the sword dropped to the floor with a tiny tinkle. They both glanced down. The sword had shrunk back to its original form, a simple dining knife. But why? Relief and confusion flooding his thoughts, Gerard stepped back to stare at the fork in his own hand, which was still a fork. Patrick arched his eyebrows. I guess you have to really believe in it. Let go. Let the dream wine take hold. Gerard sneered and was about to fling the fork against the table, knowing that, as Hephaestus, or even half-believing he was Hephaestus, the fork might plunge deep into the wood. But then stopped. You know what? I am the best blacksmith you will find, he said, brushing himself down. I am the best blacksmith. Amid the shocked stillness of the room, he gathered all the forks together from where they lay at each place and jumbled them into a heap. With a few dexterous moves, he twisted the cutlery into a tangled but pretty crown. You have just cost yourself the best blacksmith you can find. Ah, how beautiful, said Leandra, leaning forward to admire it. Gerard marched over to her and rested it gently on her head. It fit perfectly, like he knew it would. The spokes pronged the air, glittering with silvery sleekness. Two handles met end to end at the front, where it sat nicely, just below her hairline. But no matter how it looked, Gerard knew it was just a jumble of forks. Good day to you. He gave a nod that was just short of a bow and strode out, but the door didn't bump behind him soon enough to miss her saying, Oh, aren't you staying? Gerard's wine blog, when he finally got round to reviewing dream wines, read, A tricksy draught, rather full of itself. One for imaginative folk who fancy a bit of navel-gazing at the weekend. And that is how the metallic article had a feeling of ennui about the grandiose wine. So a little bit of a fight scene there. I found myself wanting to get creative with weapons, although that's probably because of the effects of the grandiose wine making things warp and change. How did I do? A bit of an odd story. Probably my favourite bit was the pigs spitting out the apple and speaking. But then again, I'm a sucker for surprises, and that one did give me a bit of a jump. Now, what can I suggest to you as a writing prompt for next time if you'd like to be featured on the show? I think of all the adjective-noun combinations that came up in the game, I quite like the villainous connoisseur. Who could that be? What might they be an expert in? And how could they turn their expertise into villainy, a crime? You know what to do. Go to annatizard.com and hit the contact button at the bottom of the page. Anything up to a short paragraph, either just to explain your idea or write a mini scene that I can read out and share. Well, I hope you enjoyed the craziness of today's show. Please do tune in for more next time. Until then, go forth and be inspired. I hope you enjoyed today's Brainstoryum. You can find out more about Exquisite Corpse and my series, The Book of Exquisite Corpse, at annatizard.com. Subscribe to my e-newsletter and you'll get Volume 1 for free. And while you're there, why not submit a few words to the Socks of Destiny on my play page? You may inspire me or inspire yourself to write a unique new story. See you next time.